Hi, and welcome back to part 2 of our double episode on women in the miners' strike of 1984-5. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, I'd go back and listen to that first. As a reminder, our podcast is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Our supporters fund our work and in return get exclusive early access to podcast episodes without ads, bonus episodes every month, free and discounted merchandise, and other content. So if you can, please join our community and help keep our collective history of struggle alive. You can learn more and sign up at patreon.com/workingclasshistory. Link in the show notes. As the strike progressed, many picket lines became increasingly violent, including at Easington in the northeast of England.
At one point, there was a police car turned over and there were some windows put out at the colliery offices, but it wasn't anything on the lines of Orgreave. I mean, my God, Orgreave is just horrendous.
As a reminder, this is Heather Wood, chair of the Easington Women's Support Group. Orgreave was a coking plant at which there were extremely violent clashes between police and pickets, which we're going to talk more about in our forthcoming series with striking miners.
After those cars had been turned over, the way people were picked up on the streets and taken to court, and even if they just happened to be passing and were arrested. I know one young lad who'd been taking his girlfriend home, they picked him up as somebody involved in that. He was taken to court and the judge just said, I'm not listening to individual stories, I'm treating you all the same, you're going to prison. He went to prison and it happens it was a relative of mine, and he was still at home with his parents. While his parents were on holiday, the governor of the prison rang my mother and said, it's quite clear that this lad shouldn't be here, and if you are prepared to accept responsibility and make sure he gets back, I'm prepared to release him to sit his exams at college. And that happened. Now, that was the enemy within, so you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just incredible what the state could do.
In July 1984, women's strike supporters organised a conference at which they discussed establishing a national organisation and a national women's protest in London. This was established formally in August as Women Against Pit Closures, WAPC. Amongst the women who came together to support the strike, there were conflicts around what the goals of WAPC should be, whether they should be narrowly in support of the strike, or whether they should have wider goals related to things like women's liberation in general. Also, many members of WAPC plainly stated that they were not feminists, but especially as time went on, many members came into contact with the feminist movement, particularly through the Greenham Common Peace Camp. These tensions resulted in a decision that 100% of the WAPC leadership would have to be women related to miners, such as wives, mothers, sisters, and so on, and that 75% of any member group also had to be miner-related women. This was in order to restrict the focus of the group to the strike itself. So, while many women's groups did join the national organisation, a good number of others didn't, like the Barnsley Miners' Wives Action Group, which remained independent. The women decided that their group should be women only, and that it would have a close relationship with, but would be autonomous from, the National Union of Mine Workers, NUM. On the 11th of August 1984, up to 25,000 women marched in London in support of the striking miners. But as the strike dragged on, the employers were able to get increasing numbers of scabs back to work.
I'm proud to say that in Easington Colliery we had the least scabs. We had the least go back to work before the official day of returning. I can't remember the numbers, but it was a handful rather than a lot as the government would have it, that they were returning to work in droves before the vote. They certainly weren't here.
Many mining communities are still divided today along lines of who scabbed and who didn't.
For me and for a lot of other people, it's still the same. When you talk about certain people, you always end the conversation with, well, he was a scab. There's a photograph taken by Keith Patterson inside of the Colliery Club when the meals are being served. And one of the women who has a plate in her hand getting a meal, her husband went back to work And I remember she told the press he was going back to work because they'd received no help from anybody. Well, there she was in the colliery club getting a meal, and her children were getting meals. Well, what other help did she want? You know, it was just a blatant lie. It was an excuse for going back. But they'll not be forgotten. No. We might even speak now, we might say hello, but never be forgotten.
In Nottinghamshire, where strikers were outnumbered by scabs, strikers had a very difficult time. And while the media frequently covered tales of violence by strikers against scabs, they didn't cover violence by scabs against strikers. On one occasion, for example, when the car and garage of Peter and Janice Nealon was set ablaze and their house vandalised, ITN rushed a news crew to the home to report on it. But when they learned that Peter was a striker and the arsonists were scabs, they apparently packed up their equipment and went home.
We actually went to Ollerton, Nottinghamshire, because Nottingham, of course, had very few people who were on strike, most scabbed, and that's where they formed the breakaway union. But we knew that the people in Ollerton who were on strike had very little because they didn't have the support of the local shops and everything that we had. So we actually got a minibus and took food down for them at Ollerton. And we stayed with them, and it was just so hard for them. I mean, they were worse off than we were because the numbers were totally different. There was more scabs going in than there were people on strike. So it must have been really, really hard for them. And they were getting the treatment that the scabs were saying that they were on the end of, people putting the windows in. That was the Nottingham strikers had their windows put in, had their people threatened. And like I say, Florence Anderson was arrested. Anne Scargill was arrested. Betty Cook. And they were in the Yorkshire area then. But we were all doing very similar things, working round the clock really, 7 days a week for a year, because while you weren't making meals, you were trying to organise, or you were trying to fundraise, or you were trying to picket, or you were trying to write stories, or, there was something all the time, every day.
As well as the employers, the government and the police, the press was almost unified against the strike.
Yes, it was very much so. Like I say, it was always something, the pickets have been and smashed this place up. And in lots of cases it wasn't true. And look at Orgreave. They discovered how many years later that the film had been screened the wrong way around. It actually was the police going at the miners. And yet now we're asking for an inquiry. The government are refusing it.
Indeed, the state broadcast of the BBC showed footage of miners throwing missiles at police, followed by a violent police charge against the miners. In reality, it later transpired that the police attack happened first, and miners responded by trying to defend themselves by throwing objects.
It's disgusting. We need justice, the way that they treat us. And the press, capitalist press, were against us. At one point the Mirror went, but in general the Mirror was with us. But it was always the headlines, the enemy within. Well, I mean, at the end we got to be quite proud that we were the enemy within. But like I said, behind the scenes, the journalist unions raised a lot of money to help us. They were doing their job and they were frightened of their job. If we would all just stick together, it would be wonderful, wouldn't it? All-out strike.
But an all-out strike was not forthcoming. We'll talk more about that in our forthcoming mini-series. In addition to the trade union movement as a whole, the Labour Party, which was set up and funded by the unions, and its leader, Neil Kinnock, were criticised for failing to support the strike.
Let us down. They let us down badly, very badly. When you think, I mentioned at the beginning of the interview that Neil Kinnock came to our village just a year before the strike, and he was all in support. His grandfather was a miner and all this, and then all of a sudden there was nothing. We were just left. We were the enemy within, and the likes of Kinnock were frightened off because the press were against us. And again, the reporters weren't against us because we were getting loads of money from their unions. It was the owners of the newspapers that were against us, but Kinnock and his ilk slotted in with that because they were frightened of their own future. No, it wasn't about the strike. It was about their future. They were looking after themselves. very much the same as they are today.
In November 1984, many women members of Lesbians and Gays Support the Miners, a queer miners support group, split off from the organisation to form Lesbians Against Pit Closures, an explicitly lesbian women's group, which joined miners' picket lines and helped fundraising activities in support of the strike. You can learn more about these groups in episodes 27 to 29 of our podcast. As the winter of 1984-5 continued, it became clear to Heather and other strike supporters that most likely the government was going to succeed in starving the miners back to work.
In all of our hearts of hearts, I think we knew. I really do. We never talked about it out loud. And certainly when I was talking to the women, it was always, we can still do it, we can still win, we can do it. And I remember one day we'd been to Middlesbrough to a rally, and Hugh Bainin, who was the lecturer at Down Uni at that time and raised a lot of money for us, he was there, and Easington women were walking up ahead after the rally, and we'd just been saying to them, we can still do it, I think that was about the January, we can still do it, we can do it. And then Hugh and I just looked at each other and both had tears in our eyes because we knew we weren't going to do it. But you have to have faith. You have to. You never know, it might have worked. But at the end of the day, I always say we didn't lose. Okay, they took our communities and everything, but they didn't take our self-respect because we stood and we fought.
Eventually, in early March 1985, just shy of a year after the strike began, miners held meetings to vote on ending the strike, which the majority ended up doing.
It was absolutely horrendous. I remember the day, I don't remember the date, but I remember the day we had there was a big meeting in Easington Welfare Hall, and the hall was packed. And Alan Cummins had spoke, Billy Stubbs had spoke, they were union officials, and I'd been asked to speak. And I can picture it now. I had my speech in my pocket, I'd written it, and I went to get it out of my pocket and I put it back, and I just spoke. It was quite heartbreaking. You're looking around at the sea of faces, people who fought for a year, and it's just sad. They felt defeated, and it took a long time for people, and still some people haven't realised we were brave in what we did. We didn't win the end game, but we were brave in what we did.
As the strike ended, Heather made a speech at a rally in Easington, which features in the film Can't Beat It Alone by Amber Films, to whom we're thankful for sharing this contemporary recording with us.
Well, I think over the last 12 months I've made some speeches, but I think this is the most nerve-wracking one of the lot, because really I don't know what to say to you all. I'm choked up because words can't say what I feel. You've been the greatest people, I think, that could ever exist, and I think people that this country, contrary to what Mrs. Thatcher says, we should be proud of, because I'm certainly proud to be part of this community. I think there's been a hell of a lot of suffering over the last few months, last 12 months anyway, but what we've got to remember is we've gained a lot from that suffering. All sections of our community, we've all come together. We weren't like that before the strike. I know we were to a certain extent, but we've never worked together like we have the last 12 months. We've got to continue it. Don't be downhearted, because I'm not. There was a young lad asked me in the welfare hall, just as the strike was over. He said, Heather, do you think it was worth it, what we've done? And I answered him sharp. He might have thought I was a bit too sharp, but I certainly don't think it's over. It won't be over until we get Margaret Thatcher out, and until we win the case for coal, and until we win a good working class society for us all. And again, from the bottom of my heart, all of you, thanks very much for showing what good people you are. I only wish the press had put it over.
While striking miners simply wouldn't have been able to hold out as long as they did without the support from their wives and women's support groups, the crucial role played by women in the dispute hadn't received adequate recognition until relatively recently.
I would say the last 10 years, people have started to look at and to record more what the women did and the worth of the women in that strike. I mean, every year since the strike, I've had at least 2 students from universities all over the country who were doing dissertations on the women's groups in the strike. But in more recent years, you've got, Maxine Peake's just written a play about the women's support groups in the strike. I think that's on in Manchester now. You've got Lucy Brownley's doing a piece for the Durham Book Festival on me, my mother and my 2 grandmothers. And it's about strong women in mining communities and that leading up to the strike. See, it's what I was saying earlier. Women just, over the years, they've just they've gone out, 26, did the soup kitchens in 26, went back. Came out, they wanted bathroom suites, they protested, went back. And just did it. This time we're saying we won't recognise them in history. That needs to be there, what women have done. And I don't know whether you saw the work that the Women's Banner Group did in Durham over this last 9 months, but there was a group formed to get a women's banner ready for the Durham Big Meeting, and we asked women throughout the county to depict what they do in patchwork, and we put a patchwork banner together with the help of Mary Turner, who's a Durham quilter, and that was paraded at Durham Big Meeting, and it was blessed. It's the first women's banner to be blessed in Durham Cathedral on Big Meeting Day with the other banners, and it's the first women's banner to be accepted into the Durham Miners Banner Group. So all this is going on. There's so much happening at the minute. People want to know about women and the work that women have done in our communities. It's amazing. So to me, I try to talk to everybody because it needs to be recorded. It needs to be written down, because otherwise the Tories, the capitalists, they'll write it their way and history will be changed.
Despite the loss of the strike itself, participation in it changed the lives of many women, especially in mining communities.
I think the good thing, one of the good things, was that women recognised that politics was for them and they could get involved and they did have a voice and they could organise and they could do things outside the home or work. That was the biggest thing. One of the biggest learning curves for all of us was how the state can operate against you, what it can do, the constraints that can put on you, the people that can be locked up for no reason. It learned us, I think it learned a lot of women about capitalism. They hadn't thought about it, and they hadn't thought how politics affected their lives. And I mean, that went for some men as well, because I can remember saying to one man, have you looked at the political aspect? And he said, oh, politics, I'm not involved in politics. And I said, do you see that pint of beer? He said, yeah, what about? I said, the tax that's on that goes to government, so that pint of beer is political. You are committing a political act. Oh, I never thought about that either. So it was opening people's eyes. So I think that was one of the good things. I just hope we don't forget it again, because the one about the state, because we were all surprised when the police landed in Easington the way they did. But we shouldn't have been, because look at Peterloo, look at 1926 strike. You know, the government have always gone out against us. So we shouldn't have been surprised. So it's important that things like this are done, recordings like this are made, so that people do remember what's gone on.
Large numbers of women involved in the strike continued to be politically active afterwards in many ways. For example, in the movement against apartheid in South Africa, in struggles against further pit closures in the 1990s, and more. Lots of the women also decided to resume their formal education to improve their own opportunities, going to colleges and universities. One woman was quoted in Jill Miller's book, You Can't Kill the Spirit, Women in a Welsh Mining Valley, as saying the following, quote, "The strike was worth millions to me. Our women's group will continue to flourish. It will go on. We suddenly found out that there was life after marriage. We've taken a political step forward in a year and formed friendships that most women would take a lifetime to achieve. And we don't intend to go back into the background. Our husbands don't want us to either. Even though some of them have been heard to cry, please give us back our wives. We have made a mark in this town, we've made a space for ourselves in this world, and we fully intend to keep it. As a matter of fact, we're going to try and make an even bigger space, or go down trying." End quote. Looking back, one incident of solidarity which occurred during the strike in particular stuck with Heather, even decades later.
One day when the first Easington scab was going back, the whole of Easington turned out, and I mean the whole of Easington, and the police were there. And Jussie Smith, who lived just near the pit, he'd just been in hospital for a stomach operation, and him and his wife had heard the commotion at the top of the street, and they went up to see what was going on. And before he even really got there, he was picked up by a policeman. There's photographic evidence of it, and he's being taken, manhandled, to a van by the police, and his wife is shouting, "I want me man, I want me man, what are you doing to him?" So they picked her up and took her to the van, and the crowd erupted at that. So the police took Jussie and his wife back home and told them if they came out again they would definitely be arrested. So it's things like that that stick in my mind. Oh, because not half an hour later the police came back to Jussie and asked him if he would go out and quieten the crowd down. You know, and these are so amazing things that you think can't happen in your village. You know, poor Jussie, arrested like that. They rang me, or somebody rang me that night and said, "Can you go down and see Jussie and his wife because they're in such a state?" You know, the other family that we were called to go to, their son was up, and there was some rumpus about he'd had a counterfeit £50 note. It turned out it wasn't counterfeit, but they'd searched his parents' house, ransacked it, contacted his employer in London, he was a chef, and raided his flat in London, all knowing that they'd seen the £50 note and it was okay. And that's the lad. I had to get Jack Dormand to go and get released from the police station. I went down to that lad's parents' house the night it happened, and his mother was sat, and she was riddled with arthritis. And I always remember, I'm a very visual person, you know, and I remember her hands that were sort of all crooked and wizened and with the arthritis, and she was only very thin, and she was crying, and the house was lost. And I said to the husband, "Did they have a search warrant?" And he said, "No, Heather, but I asked them, and they said, we can go and get one, but it'll be worse when we come back." So they just let them ransack the house, and they didn't even tidy up afterwards, and the lad had done nothing wrong. So all those things stick forever in your head.
This small act of solidarity of the community was a microcosm of what sort of things the working class can achieve when we come together, and how we could make the world into a very different place.
Oh yes, if we all stick together, we could do it. But we fall in the Tory trap and we fight each other rather than fight the real enemy. One day.
That's certainly been the case for the bulk of recent history. But at the same time, there have always been people like Heather, the miners' wives, and the other women who came together to support the strike. And while the repercussions of the miners' strike persist today, so does the fight for a new kind of world.
I always say I'm a utopian socialist, me. But I do hope we get it. It's like I always said to my children, aim high, and if you get halfway, you're all right.
So that's it for this double episode. If you want to learn more about struggles of miners in Britain, check out our episodes 27 to 29 about queer support for the strike, and episode 81 about the strikes in 1972 and 74. We're only able to make these podcasts because of support from you, our listeners. So if you value our work, please do think about joining us at patreon.com/workingclasshistory, link in the show notes. In return for your support, you get early access to content, you get ad-free episodes, exclusive bonus episodes, 2 exclusive podcast series called Radical Reads and Fireside Chats. You also get discounted merch and more. If you can't spare the cash right now, don't worry about it. But do please tell your friends about this podcast and give us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast app. To our existing Patreon supporters, thank you for making this podcast possible. Special thanks to Jazz Hands, Fernando Lopez Ojeda, Nick Williams and Old Norm. Music in these episodes is courtesy of the Easington Colliery Band. Thanks to Amber Films for the audio clip. Learn more about both of these on the links in the show notes. This updated episode was edited by Tyler Hill, with original editing by Jesse French. Thanks for listening, and catch you next time.